Your mother should be grateful we found her a seat at all. Catherine Prescott said it with a smile, which somehow made the words worse. Natalie Brooks stopped 3 steps outside the bridal suite, one hand resting against the cool brass door handle, while laughter drifted from the private lounge across the hall. 40 minutes remained before she was supposed to walk down the aisle. 40 minutes before the string quartet began the processional. 40 minutes before she stood beside Ethan Prescott and promised him the rest of her life. Natalie did not move. Through the open lounge door, she could see Catherine surrounded by several Prescott relatives holding champagne glasses beneath soft amber lights. Her future mother-in-law wore pale blue silk, and the effortless confidence of someone who had spent decades believing good manners meant never sounding cruel while saying cruel things. Catherine, one woman murmured, clearly uncomfortable. I am only being practical, Catherine replied. Linda is not accustomed to events like this. She would probably be happier somewhere less formal. Natalie followed Catherine's gaze. At the far end of the lounge stood Linda Brooks, Natalie's mother, holding a small handbag against her navy dress. The dress had cost $180. Natalie knew because Linda had resisted buying it for 3 weeks. That is too much money for something I will wear once, she had said. Now she stood among crystal glasses, tailored suits, and floral arrangements that cost more than her monthly mortgage, looking as though she wished she could become invisible. Natalie felt her jaw tighten. Linda had heard every word. She gave Natalie the smallest smile, the one she had used throughout her daughter's childhood whenever something hurt, but she did not want Claire to worry. Natalie caught the thought before it finished. Not Claire. Natalie. The pressure of the day was already making everything feel strangely distant, as though she were watching somebody else's wedding. Ethan stood only 6 feet from his mother. That was what mattered. He had heard it too. Natalie waited for him to speak. He adjusted his cuff link. Catherine took another sip of champagne. Ethan looked toward Linda, then toward Natalie. For one brief second, their eyes met. He gave Natalie a faint, apologetic smile and lifted one shoulder. Let it go. He did not need to say the words. She had heard them enough this weekend. Natalie had spent years in uniform learning to notice what other people missed. Hesitation before an answer, silence where a decision should have been, the subtle difference between someone who did not understand and someone who simply did not care. Ethan understood perfectly. He was choosing comfort. Natalie, sweetheart. Linda crossed the room before her daughter could speak. You should be getting ready. Up close, Natalie could see that her mother's eyes were brighter than usual. Mom, did she say that to you? Linda glanced toward Catherine. It does not matter. It matters to me. Not today. Linda reached up and carefully straightened the edge of Natalie's veil. Her fingers were steady. You have 39 minutes until you are supposed to be standing in front of 200 people. Do not spend them worrying about me. Natalie looked past her mother toward Ethan. He had turned away and was speaking quietly with his father, Douglas, as though nothing important had happened. 39 minutes. The number settled into Natalie's mind with the precision of a countdown. She had made difficult decisions with less time than that. She had entered rooms where everyone expected her to remain calm because other people depended on it. Yet nothing in her years of service had prepared her for the particular ache of watching the man she loved remain silent while his family made her mother feel small. Catherine noticed Natalie watching and raised her glass. There is our bride, she called brightly. Do not look so serious. This is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Natalie held her gaze. Around them, conversations slowly resumed. Linda touched her daughter's arm. Ethan still did not come over. Natalie glanced at the clock above the lounge doors. 38 minutes. Then she looked back at the man waiting to become her husband and realized that before she walked down any aisle, there was one question he was going to have to answer. 38 minutes was enough time for Natalie to remember that this had not started in the lounge. The first warning had come the night before at the rehearsal dinner, inside a private dining room overlooking the Potomac, where Catherine had studied Linda's simple gray dress and asked whether she had received the note about cocktail attire. Linda had smiled and said that she had. Catherine's eyes had traveled over the dress once more before she answered, of course. 2 words. Perfectly polite. Perfectly clear. Natalie had felt the insult immediately, but beneath the table Ethan had touched her hand. Please, he whispered. She is nervous about tomorrow. Natalie let it go. The second warning came that morning when Douglas Prescott stood beside the seating chart with a hotel coordinator and suggested moving Linda 3 tables farther from the front. We have people coming who have known our family for 30 years, he explained. It is just a matter of making the room work. Natalie had stared at the card bearing her mother's name. She is the mother of the bride. Douglas smiled as though explaining arithmetic to a child. Nobody is saying she is not. Ethan appeared moments later and promised Natalie that his father was only trying to solve a seating problem. Natalie refused the change, but she let the insult pass without confrontation. The third came during photographs less than 2 hours ago. The Prescott family had filled the hotel garden beneath white roses and late afternoon sunlight while the photographer arranged parents, cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends around Natalie and Ethan. Linda stood 10 feet away holding Natalie's bouquet. She waited through photograph after photograph until Natalie finally asked, "Where is my mom?" Catherine had laughed lightly. "We will get one with her, sweetheart. We are doing family first." Silence followed. Even the photographer seemed unsure where to look. Natalie had stepped out of position and taken Linda by the hand. "She is family." Catherine corrected herself immediately, but the words had already landed. Ethan apologized afterward. Not for his mother. For the awkwardness. "After today, everything will settle down," he promised. Natalie had wanted to believe him because believing him was easier than examining what she was being asked to accept. Now, standing outside the lounge with 35 minutes remaining, she could see the pattern with uncomfortable clarity. Catherine insulted. Linda absorbed it. Ethan minimized it. Natalie preserved the piece. Each time the cost of that piece had been paid by the same person. "Honey." Linda's voice pulled Natalie back. "You are thinking too much." Natalie looked at her. "Maybe I have not been thinking enough." Linda gave a tired smile. "Families are complicated. Respect is not." Across the room, Ethan laughed at something Douglas said. The sound reached Natalie beneath the soft music from the ceremony hall, where guests were beginning to take their seats. An event coordinator appeared at the doorway carrying a clipboard. "Natalie, we are about 32 minutes out. Hair and makeup would like you back in the bridal suite." "Thank you. I will be there in a minute." The coordinator disappeared. 32 minutes. Natalie looked at Catherine, then Douglas, then Ethan. She suddenly understood why every insult had been described as too small to confront. A joke. A misunderstanding. A seating problem. An awkward photograph. Nothing serious enough to risk the wedding over. But together they formed something larger. They formed a future. Thanksgiving dinners where Linda would be tolerated. Christmas mornings where Catherine decided which traditions mattered. Family photographs where someone always found a reason for Linda to stand near the edge. And Ethan beside Natalie, whispering the same instruction every time. Let it go. Natalie had spent years believing patience was strength. Sometimes it was. Sometimes patience gave people room to correct themselves. But patience without boundaries could become permission. She looked at Linda, the woman who had spent a lifetime asking for less so her daughter could have more. Then she looked at the clock. 31 minutes. "Mom, go back to the bridal suite for me." Linda hesitated. "What are you going to do?" Natalie kept her eyes on Ethan. "I am going to give him one chance to make this right." She crossed the lounge toward him, her steps measured and quiet. Ethan noticed her approaching and smiled, apparently relieved that the moment had passed. Natalie stopped in front of him. "I need to speak with you alone." Something in her voice erased his smile. She turned toward the empty corridor without waiting for an answer. After a brief hesitation, Ethan followed. The corridor outside the lounge was cooler and almost silent, insulated from the conversations behind them by thick carpet and closed ballroom doors. Natalie walked nearly 20 feet before stopping beside a tall window overlooking the hotel gardens. White chairs stood in perfect rows below. Staff members adjusted flowers along the aisle. In less than half an hour, she was supposed to walk between those chairs toward Ethan. He stopped behind her. What is going on? Natalie turned. I need you to do one thing before the ceremony. Ethan exhaled, already looking tired. If this is about my mother, I told you she should not have said that. You told me she should not have said it. You did not tell her. Natalie, we have guests arriving. Then this should not take long. She held his gaze. Go back inside. Tell your mother what she said to mine was disrespectful. Ask her to apologize. Ethan stared at her. Right now? Right now. 28 minutes before our wedding? Yes. He glanced toward the lounge doors. Can we handle this tomorrow? Natalie felt the answer before he finished speaking. No. Ethan lowered his voice. My mother is difficult. You know that. If I confront her in front of everybody, she will get defensive, my father will get involved, and suddenly this becomes the only thing anyone remembers about today. My mother already remembers it. Linda said she was fine. My mother says she is fine when she does not want to become someone else's burden. Ethan rubbed his forehead. You are turning a stupid comment into a test of our entire relationship. Natalie remained still. No. I am asking the man I am about to marry whether he believes my mother deserves basic respect. Of course she does. Then say it. Where your family can hear you. Ethan looked away. Outside, the wind stirred the ribbons tied to the ceremony chairs. Natalie could faintly hear the string quartet tuning beyond the glass. 27 minutes. Why is this so hard for you? She asked. Ethan faced her again. Because you do not understand my family. I understand them better today than I did yesterday. That is not fair. Neither was making my mother feel unwelcome at her daughter's wedding. His expression hardened. Nobody said she was unwelcome. Natalie said nothing. Ethan continued, frustration sharpening his words. My parents have spent months planning this. They paid for most of the venue. They invited people who matter to them. There are expectations. And where does my mother fit into those expectations? He hesitated. It lasted less than a second, but Natalie saw it. She had spent too many years listening to people under pressure not to recognize the moment before someone said what they actually believed. Ethan. Her voice became quieter. Where does she fit? That is not what I mean. You have not answered. He looked toward the garden, then back at her. Your mother is a good person, Natalie. But she comes from a different world. My parents are used to certain standards, certain circles. Sometimes people need to understand where they fit. The corridor seemed to lose every sound. Natalie studied the man standing before her in the tuxedo they had chosen together 3 months earlier. She expected anger. What came instead was clarity. There it is, she said. Ethan frowned. There what is? The thing you have been trying not to say all weekend. You are twisting my words. No. I finally stopped doing that for you. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. We are 25 minutes from the ceremony. Please do not destroy everything over one sentence. Natalie looked through the window at the empty aisle. 25 minutes. Enough time to put on her veil. Enough time to take photographs. Enough time to pretend she had not heard him. She thought of years ahead, of holidays and birthdays and family tables where Linda would always be expected to accept the smaller place. Because challenging it might make someone uncomfortable. Natalie looked back at Ethan. I asked you for an apology, she said. You gave me an explanation for why my mother deserved the insult. Ethan opened his mouth, but Natalie had already turned away. Her footsteps were quiet against the carpet as she walked toward the bridal suite. She did not hurry. For the first time that day, the countdown no longer felt like it was carrying her toward the altar. It felt like time being returned to her. Natalie closed the bridal suite door behind her and stood with one hand resting on the brass handle. The room smelled faintly of hairspray, roses, and fresh coffee. Her bouquet waited on a table beside a pair of champagne glasses nobody had touched. Linda stood near the mirror, carefully folding a tissue between her fingers as though keeping her hands occupied could keep the entire day together. What did he say? She asked. Natalie met her mother's reflection. Enough. Linda turned. Natalie, please do not ask me to ignore it. I was going to ask you not to make a decision because you are angry. Natalie walked toward her. I am not angry anymore. That answer worried Linda more. She stepped closer and studied her daughter's face. Then what are you? Natalie looked toward the clock. 23 minutes. Certain. Linda was silent. Beyond the wall, the string quartet moved into another warm-up passage, the notes softened by distance. Guests were taking their seats. Somewhere downstairs, 200 people believed the next hour had already been decided. Linda reached for Natalie's sleeve. Your lace is twisted. It was such an ordinary thing to say that Natalie almost laughed. Even now, her mother was trying to fix something small because the larger thing hurt too much to touch. Linda gently straightened the cuff. The lace slid back an inch. A narrow black metal bracelet appeared beneath it. Linda's fingers stopped. The bracelet was worn at the edges, its surface dulled by years of use. An engraved name ran across the metal. Natalie instinctively covered it with her opposite hand. You still wear it, Linda said. Always. A quiet knock came from the half-open door. Colonel David Sullivan stood in the hallway in a dark suit, accompanied by another military guest. He had been on his way toward the ceremony hall when he noticed Natalie through the doorway. Sorry, he said. I did not mean to interrupt. Natalie gave him a small nod. You're fine, David. Sullivan had known her long enough to recognize the difference between Natalie's public calm and the deeper stillness that appeared when she had reached a decision. His eyes dropped briefly to the bracelet beneath the lace. He had seen it before. Not often. Natalie never treated it as jewelry. She wore it as a reminder. Sullivan looked from the bracelet to her face. Everything all right? Natalie paused. It will be. Sullivan did not press. That was one reason she respected him. 20 minutes, someone called from farther down the corridor. A wedding coordinator hurried past carrying a clipboard and disappeared around the corner. Sullivan stepped aside to let her pass, then looked back at Natalie. If you need anything, I am nearby. Thank you. He continued toward the ceremony hall, but his pace slowed after several steps. The other guest glanced at him. Something wrong. Sullivan looked back once. Through the doorway, he saw Linda adjusting the lace over Natalie's bracelet again. I do not know, he said. But she only touches that bracelet when something matters. Inside, Linda lowered her hands. I gave that to you because I wanted you to remember her, she said. I know. Not because I wanted it deciding your life. Natalie looked down at the engraved metal. It is not. She ran her thumb across the familiar letters. It is reminding me who decides. Linda's eyes filled with concern. Ethan loves you. Maybe he does. Natalie lifted her gaze. But love cannot require me to pretend disrespect is harmless just because confronting it is inconvenient. Linda sat slowly in the chair beside the mirror. I can take a few rude comments. I know you can. Natalie knelt beside her, careful of the wedding gown. You have taken more than you should have had to for most of your life. Then do not sacrifice your happiness trying to protect me. Natalie held her mother's hand. What if marrying someone who thinks you belong beneath his family is the sacrifice? Linda had no answer. The quartet stopped warming up. For several seconds, the hotel seemed strangely quiet. Natalie looked again at the bracelet. Cold metal beneath white lace. One belonged to the life she had already lived. The other belonged to the life she was expected to begin in 19 minutes. Her thumb settled over the engraved name, and suddenly she was no longer looking at herself in a bridal mirror. She could hear rain tapping against an old windshield. She could smell coffee from a paper cup. She could see her mother's hands holding this same bracelet on a gray Virginia morning years earlier. And she could hear the words Linda had spoken before Natalie walked toward a waiting military airfield. The memory returned with the sound of rain. Years earlier, before sunrise, Natalie had stood beside Linda's aging sedan outside a military airfield in Virginia, watching water gather along the windshield while aircraft lights blinked beyond the security fence. Her duffel bag rested near her feet. The air smelled of wet pavement and coffee, and somewhere beyond the low buildings came the steady hum of engines preparing for departure. Natalie had been younger then, experienced enough to know how to hide uncertainty from most people and still not experienced enough to hide it from her mother. Linda stood beneath a small umbrella that the wind kept pushing sideways. You packed enough socks? She asked. Natalie laughed. Mom, I am deploying, not going to summer camp. Linda nodded seriously. People need socks everywhere. That was how she handled fear. She made lists. She packed sandwiches. She checked the weather 3 times. She asked practical questions because practical questions had answers. When the announcement came for Natalie to report inside, Linda did not cry. She reached into her coat pocket instead. One more thing. In her palm rested a narrow black metal bracelet. Natalie recognized the engraved name immediately. It belonged to an officer whose example had shaped the way Natalie understood service, leadership, and responsibility. Linda closed Natalie's fingers around it. You told me she believed character mattered most when nobody important was watching. Natalie looked at the bracelet. She did. Linda helped slide it over her wrist. Then she adjusted the metal until the engraved letters faced upward. Whatever rank you earn, remember who you are when nobody is saluting. Natalie had carried those words through every promotion that followed. She remembered them when younger service members watched how she handled pressure. She remembered them when easier decisions competed with better ones. Rank could establish authority. It could not manufacture character. The bridal suite returned slowly around her. White roses. Warm lights. The mirror. Her mother's hand inside hers. 18 minutes remained. Natalie rose and looked at her reflection. White lace covered most of the bracelet again, leaving only a thin dark edge visible beneath the cuff. She had imagined this dress for months. She had imagined Ethan waiting at the end of the aisle, Linda smiling from the front row, music rising as the doors opened. What she had never imagined was standing here asking herself whether walking forward would require leaving something essential behind. Linda came to stand beside her. You do not owe me this, she whispered. Natalie met her mother's eyes in the mirror. This is not about what I owe you. Then what is it about? Who I become if I pretend today was acceptable. Linda looked down. People can change. Yes. Natalie turned toward her. But they have to believe they were wrong first. A knock sounded at the door. The wedding coordinator leaned inside. 17 minutes, Natalie. We need you downstairs in 5. Thank you. The door closed again. Linda searched her daughter's face. What are you going to do? Natalie reached up and removed her veil. She folded it carefully and placed it on the dressing table. Then she picked up her bouquet, considered it for a moment, and set that down too. Linda's breath caught. Natalie. Natalie took her mother's hands. Her voice remained steady. I need you to trust me. Linda looked at the veil, then at the bouquet, then back at her daughter. I have trusted you. Since before you knew what the word meant. Natalie smiled faintly. Then trust me for 17 more minutes. In the corridor outside, Colonel David Sullivan paused near the entrance to the ceremony hall. Through the open doors, he could see Ethan taking his place at the front while guests settled into rows of white chairs. Sullivan checked his watch. 16 minutes. Something about Natalie's expression remained with him. He reached for his phone, then stopped. Not yet. This was her decision to make. Back inside the bridal suite, Natalie touched the bracelet one final time. Her mother's words were no longer a memory. They were an answer. Nobody in that hotel was saluting her. Nobody needed to know her rank. Nobody needed to know what she had accomplished. That was precisely why the choice mattered. Natalie opened the door. Come with me, Mom. Linda stood. Where? Natalie looked toward the ceremony hall, where the first notes of prelude music were beginning to rise. I am going to make sure nobody waits at that altar for an answer I already have. The ceremony music began 7 minutes early. Natalie heard the first measured notes from the hallway and stopped beside the closed double doors. Linda stood at her right, silent now, while the wedding coordinator hurried toward them with confusion written across her face. Natalie, we are not ready for you yet. I know. Natalie looked toward the doors. I need you to stop the processional. The coordinator blinked. Stop it. Please. Something in Natalie's voice ended the questions. The coordinator slipped through the doors. Seconds later, the music softened, stumbled into an uncertain finish, and disappeared. Inside the ceremony hall, nearly 200 guests began whispering. Ethan stood beneath an arch of white roses at the front of the room. Douglas leaned toward him. Catherine turned in her seat and looked toward the entrance. The officiant glanced down at his notes, then toward the coordinator approaching from the side aisle. Natalie waited. Her engagement ring felt suddenly heavy on her hand. Linda touched her arm. You can still take 5 minutes. Natalie looked at her mother. I have taken 3 days. The coordinator returned and opened one door. They are waiting. Natalie nodded. Good. She stepped inside without her bouquet and without her veil. The whispers stopped almost immediately. There was no processional music. No carefully timed entrance. Only the soft sound of Natalie's shoes against the floor as she walked down the side aisle instead of the center aisle prepared for the bride. Ethan stared at her. His expression moved from relief to confusion when he saw her empty hands. Natalie stopped several feet from the officiant. May I use the microphone? The officiant hesitated, then handed it to her. Ethan stepped closer. Natalie, what are you doing? She looked at him. Answering the question you already answered for me. Catherine rose halfway from her chair. What question? Natalie turned toward the guests. She could feel Linda standing near the back. Colonel David Sullivan sat several rows away, watching without moving. Natalie raised the microphone. I am sorry that all of you came here expecting a wedding. A ripple of unease moved through the room. Ethan's face tightened. Natalie, she continued, there will not be a wedding today. Silence fell so completely that the hum of the ventilation system seemed suddenly loud. Catherine stood. Douglas stared at Natalie as if waiting for someone to correct her. Ethan moved closer. Can we talk privately? We did. You cannot be serious. Natalie lowered the microphone slightly. I asked you to do one thing before I walked down this aisle. I asked you to tell your mother that humiliating mine was wrong. Catherine's expression hardened. Humiliating? Natalie looked at her. Yesterday it was her dress. This morning it was her seat. During photographs, she was somehow not family enough to be included with the family. Today you said she should be grateful she had a seat at all. Several guests turned toward Catherine. She opened her mouth, but Natalie looked back at Ethan. And every time it happened, you asked me to ignore it. Ethan lowered his voice. We can fix this. I gave you the chance. Natalie slipped the engagement ring from her finger. A quiet breath moved through the first row. She walked to a small table beside the officiant and placed the ring on its polished surface. Click. The tiny sound carried through the silence. I will not begin a marriage by teaching my mother that keeping your family comfortable matters more than her dignity. Ethan stared at the ring. You are throwing away everything we planned. Natalie shook her head. Plans can be replaced. Character is harder. At the back, Linda covered her mouth with one hand. Natalie met her eyes across the room. The bracelet beneath Natalie's lace cuff caught a line of afternoon light. Colonel Sullivan noticed it. Then he noticed something else. Natalie was calm. Not uncertain. Not waiting to be persuaded. The decision had already been made. Catherine stepped into the aisle. This is unbelievable. Douglas rose beside her. Ethan remained near the altar, looking between Natalie and the ring as if one of them might reverse what had just happened. Natalie handed the microphone back to the officiant. I am sorry for the inconvenience, she said quietly. But I am not sorry for the decision. Then she turned away from the altar she would never reach. Behind her, the Prescott family began speaking all at once. Sullivan stood from his chair, slipped his phone from his pocket, and walked silently toward the nearest exit. The Prescott family did not wait until Natalie reached the back of the ceremony hall. You cannot humiliate our family like this and simply walk away, Catherine called after her. The words stopped the remaining whispers. Natalie turned slowly. Catherine stood in the center aisle, pale blue silk catching the afternoon light, while Douglas moved beside her with the rigid expression of a man accustomed to being heard. Ethan remained near the altar. Mom, stop, he said, but there was no conviction behind it. Catherine ignored him. We welcomed you into this family. We paid for this venue, the reception, the flowers, the catering. Do you understand how much money has been spent today? Natalie looked at her calmly. Send me an itemized accounting for anything I am legally responsible for. Douglas gave a short, disbelieving laugh. This is not about an invoice. Then do not make it about money. His expression hardened. It is about responsibility. 200 people rearranged their lives to be here. Business associates flew in from across the country. Friends booked hotels. Your decision affects everyone. Natalie glanced around the room. Some guests looked uncomfortable. Others watched with open attention. Then I owe them an apology for the inconvenience, she said. I do not owe anyone a marriage I know is wrong. Linda had reached her daughter by then. Natalie, we can leave. Catherine looked directly at her. Yes, perhaps that would be best. This entire situation began because everything had to become about you. Linda went still. Natalie did not. No, she said. This situation began because you believed my mother would accept whatever you said about her without consequence. Ethan finally left the altar and walked toward them. Natalie, enough. You made your point. She looked at him. You still think this is about making a point? I think you are making a spectacle out of something we could have handled privately. Your mother did not insult mine privately. Ethan lowered his voice. People are watching. They were watching when she did it too. That ended his answer. Near the side exit, Colonel David Sullivan stepped into the quiet hotel corridor and checked his phone. He knew Major General Henry Lawson was attending a retirement ceremony at an army facility roughly 8 miles away. Sullivan hesitated before selecting the number. He was not calling to rescue Natalie. She had already made her decision. He was calling because Lawson knew the Brooks family, and because something Catherine had said about Linda had stayed with him. The call connected. Sullivan, Lawson answered. Formal voices and distant applause could be heard behind him. Sir, I apologize for interrupting Colonel Matthews's retirement. What happened? Sullivan looked through the doorway. Natalie stood beside Linda while the Prescotts continued arguing around them. I am at Major Brooks's wedding. Lawson paused. Natalie's wedding? It was supposed to be. The background noise on the other end seemed to recede. Explain. Sullivan did, briefly. He described the remarks toward Linda, Ethan's refusal to intervene, and Natalie's decision before the ceremony began. Lawson said nothing for several seconds. Then he asked, Is Mrs. Brooks still there? Yes, sir. Another pause. Stay with them. I am leaving here shortly. Sir, Natalie did not ask me to call you. I know Natalie. She would not. The line ended. Sullivan slipped the phone into his pocket and returned toward the ceremony hall. Inside, Douglas was speaking again. You are making a decision you will regret when all of this emotion wears off. Natalie looked at him. You keep assuming I am emotional because that would be easier than accepting that I am certain. Catherine folded her arms. And what exactly do you think happens now? Natalie looked toward the engagement ring still resting beside the officiant. Now everyone goes home. After everything we spent? Catherine demanded. Natalie studied her for a moment. That seems to be the part you cannot forgive. Ethan stepped closer. His voice softened. Nat, please. We can still fix this. She had always disliked that nickname from anyone except him. Now even it sounded unfamiliar. There was a moment when you could have fixed it, she said. I told you exactly what to do. You wanted me to choose between you and my mother. No. I wanted you to choose between disrespect and decency. Ethan fell silent. Sullivan re-entered at the back of the room and caught Natalie's eye. He gave no signal beyond a small nod. Outside the hotel, afternoon traffic moved steadily along the road. 8 miles away, a retirement ceremony was ending, and Major General Henry Lawson was already walking toward the exit. 22 minutes after Natalie left the altar, the ceremony hall no longer looked like a wedding waiting to happen. Guests had begun collecting purses and jackets, but few had actually left. Conversations stayed low. The flowers remained perfect. The engagement ring still rested on the small table near the officiant, untouched beneath the warm afternoon light. Natalie stood beside Linda near the rear doors while the wedding coordinator quietly explained that the reception ballroom was already prepared. And the catering had been paid in full. Catherine was still arguing with Douglas about what should be done with the guests. Ethan had stopped trying to persuade Natalie. He stood alone near the first row, staring at the floor. Then Colonel David Sullivan straightened. The movement was subtle, but Natalie noticed immediately. She followed his gaze toward the hallway. A man in army dress uniform appeared at the entrance, with a single aide several steps behind him. Silver stars caught the light at his shoulders. Natalie recognized Major General Henry Lawson before anyone else in the room understood why Sullivan had come to attention. Her eyes narrowed. "David," she said quietly. Sullivan gave her an apologetic look. "One telephone call." Lawson entered without ceremony. There was no entourage, no announcement, no attempt to command the room. He had come directly from the retirement ceremony 8 miles away, and the ribbons on his uniform carried more history than most people present could read. Ethan looked toward Natalie. Catherine's expression changed instantly. Douglas straightened his jacket. "General Lawson," Sullivan said. Lawson nodded to him, then looked at Natalie. "Major Brooks." Natalie stood straighter from habit. "Sir, I understand you have had an interesting afternoon." A faint trace of warmth touched his voice. "That is one description." Lawson glanced toward the empty altar, then toward the ring, but he asked no questions. Instead, his eyes searched the room. "Where's your mother?" Natalie pointed beside her. "Right here." Lawson turned. Linda seemed almost startled when he walked directly toward her. "Mrs. Brooks." "Yes." He offered his hand. "Henry Lawson. I have wanted to meet you for years." Linda accepted his hand cautiously. "I am afraid you have me at a disadvantage, General." "Then let me correct that." Lawson smiled. "Your daughter has served under my command, and whenever someone praised her judgment, she usually found a way to give somebody else the credit. Very often, that somebody was you." Linda looked at Natalie. Natalie lowered her eyes for half a second. Lawson continued. "She once told a room full of young officers that her first lessons in leadership came from watching her mother work long days, keep promises when nobody was checking, and treat people with dignity when there was nothing to gain from it." The room had grown quiet again. Catherine and Douglas stood several yards away, listening. Lawson looked at Linda with uncomplicated respect. "So, thank you." Linda swallowed. "For what?" "For raising the kind of officer people trust before they ever look at the rank on her uniform." Ethan stared at Natalie. He knew she was a major. He had known for years. What he had never understood was what that rank represented to the people who had served beside her. Catherine seemed to understand even less. "General," she began carefully, "I think there has been a misunderstanding about what happened here." Lawson turned toward her. His expression remained courteous. "I am sure there are several perspectives." Catherine appeared relieved. Then Lawson added, "But respect is usually simple enough to recognize." Nobody answered. He did not lecture her. He did not need to. Lawson turned back to Linda. "Colonel Sullivan told me you were made to feel as though you did not belong here." Linda glanced at Natalie. "I do not want anyone making a fuss over me." Lawson smiled slightly. "Your daughter said you would say that." Natalie almost laughed. Lawson's expression became serious. "Mrs. Brooks, my presence does not make you important. Your daughter's rank does not make you deserving of courtesy. You deserved respect before I walked through that door." The words settled across the hall. Catherine looked away first. Douglas said nothing. Ethan's eyes moved toward the ring near the altar. Natalie watched him and understood that the reversal was not that a general had arrived. Nothing about her mother had changed in the last 22 minutes. Nothing about Natalie had changed either. Only the Prescotts' understanding of whom they had dismissed had changed. Lawson stepped beside Natalie. "Do you want help getting you and your mother out of here?" Natalie looked through the open doors toward the reception ballroom, where tables were set, food waited, and a band had already been paid to play. Then she looked at Linda. For the first time since the morning began, Natalie smiled without forcing it. "Not yet, sir," she said. "They prepared a room for a celebration. I think my mother and I can still give them one." Natalie looked through the open doors toward the reception ballroom and made the first decision of the afternoon that felt light. "Please serve the food," she told the wedding coordinator. The woman blinked. "All of it. All of it. Everyone came a long way. Nobody needs to leave hungry because the ceremony did not happen." The coordinator's expression softened. "I can do that." Natalie turned to the guests still gathered between rows of white chairs. You were invited here to celebrate with us. The reason for that celebration has changed, but the tables are set, dinner is ready, and the band is here. Please stay if you would like. For a second, nobody moved. Then an older couple near the aisle smiled at Linda and walked toward the ballroom. Others followed. The transition was awkward at first, then strangely natural. Chairs scraped softly. Conversations returned. Glass doors opened onto a room glowing with amber light, white flowers, and tables that no longer needed to belong to a wedding. Catherine stared at Natalie as if she could not understand why there was no revenge in her. Douglas said nothing. Ethan approached slowly. Natalie. She turned. His voice was quieter than before. I am sorry. She studied him. There had been a time that morning when those words might have changed everything. I believe you are sorry, she said. Hope appeared briefly in his face. Natalie continued. But being sorry after consequences arrive is not the same as standing up when it costs you something. Ethan lowered his eyes. Is there really nothing I can say? Natalie glanced toward Linda, who was speaking with Major General Henry Lawson near the ballroom entrance. There was. I told you exactly what it was. She left Ethan with the silence he had chosen earlier. Inside the ballroom, dinner service began. Natalie found the bandleader near the dance floor. Were you scheduled to play the first dance? Yes, ma'am. Do you still have the song? He nodded. Natalie smiled. Play it. The opening notes moved gently through the room. Linda turned toward the dance floor, confused. Natalie crossed to her and extended one hand. Mom. Linda immediately shook her head. Absolutely not. That was supposed to be your first dance. It still is. Linda looked around at the guests. Natalie, everybody is watching. Natalie smiled. You spent my whole life telling me that what matters most is what we do when nobody is watching. I think we can survive this. Linda laughed, and the last of the tension left her face. She took her daughter's hand. Together they stepped onto the polished floor. Natalie remembered an old kitchen with worn linoleum, a radio beside the sink, and a mother who came home tired, but somehow always found enough energy for one more song. There had been no chandeliers then. No expensive flowers. No important guests. Yet Natalie could not remember ever feeling richer. Colonel David Sullivan rose quietly near the edge of the room. Several military guests followed, not because protocol demanded it, but because respect did. Major General Lawson stood as well. Soon civilian guests began rising too, understanding the gesture without needing it explained. Linda noticed and whispered, "Why are they standing?" Natalie looked around the room. Because they want to. Linda's eyes filled with tears. Near the doorway, Ethan watched in silence. Catherine stood several feet behind him. Douglas remained beside her. None of them were being mocked. Nobody had asked them to leave. That was the difference Natalie wanted to remember. Dignity did not require returning humiliation for humiliation. When the song ended, the applause began softly and grew until it filled the ballroom. Natalie embraced her mother. Later, as evening light faded beyond the hotel windows, she changed into a simple navy coat and prepared to leave. Lawson offered her a quiet farewell. Sullivan squeezed her shoulder. At the ceremony hall, the engagement ring remained where Natalie had placed it, waiting for Ethan to collect it. She never went back for it. Outside, the pavement still held the silver reflection of an earlier rain. Linda walked beside her toward the parking lot. Natalie slipped her hand through her mother's arm, the old remembrance bracelet cool beneath her sleeve. Behind them remained the white flowers, the unused aisle, and a future Natalie had almost entered because disappointing people seemed harder than disappointing herself. Ahead was uncertainty, but it belonged to her. Rank could make a room notice you. Respect could make people stand. Character was what remained when there was no rank, no audience, and nothing left to gain.